Hello and welcome to Fault Lines, viewers. This week the focus is on the Russia-Ukraine war, the biggest war, the longest conflict since the Second World War. On the show today, we tell you the key milestones in the conflict which has been waging since February 2022. We then tell you the 5 regions that define the Ukraine war, the regions that are at the heart of this bloody and long conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And then this conflict, remember, has its genesis in the decades-long post-Cold War fault lines between Russia and the Western Bloc. We tell you about Vladimir Putin's red lines that are defining this conflict. But before that, we start the show by getting you the headlines that we're tracking of this story. Russian forces shoot down 6 guided bombs and 179 drones in 24 hours. Russian forces have bombed key towns in Ukraine's Donetsk region. Hours before the summit, Donald Trump says that there would be very severe consequences if Vladimir Putin did not agree to stop his war in Ukraine, even as British Prime Minister Keir Starmer invites Ukraine President Zelensky to London. Germany plans to fund a $500 million fresh package of military equipment and munitions for Ukraine. This will be sourced primarily from the US as NATO looks to continue arming Ukraine in the conflict. From almost throwing him out of the Oval Office for not showing enough gratitude to Trump to now arming his country with America's most lethal weapons. Trump's Ukraine policy has witnessed a sea change, and he now wants a second summit with both Putin and Zelensky on the table. Now, the deepest fault line, viewers, in the world is the one that divides Russia and the West. The Cold War ended, the Warsaw Pact ended, USSR ceased to exist, but the rivalry, the one-upmanship and the military tensions between Russia and America have in fact intensified in the post-Cold War era. And the Russia-Ukraine conflict that's going on due to this needs to be seen from that prism. The real shot of peace at the Alaska summit could actually be if these major issues, these underlying fault lines are actually addressed. The icy glaciers are, in fact, some would say, the ideal setting to break the ice between the West and Russia for hopefully a ceasefire and hopefully for some sort of a cessation of hostilities. But many questions do linger. What happens to the war? What happens to the red lines that Vladimir Putin has identified about the gradual expansion of NATO? What about Zelensky's core demand, which is that his country should be given adequate security, those guarantees that Donald Trump has been absolutely clear that nations cannot expect America to continue to fund for them? What happens to all those questions? This show is going to try and decode some of that for you, viewers. And let's now talk about the 5 key milestones as far as this war is concerned. Now, it's very easy to treat this as one long conflict that's been going on for 3.5 years, but there have been several important milestones, key inflection points that changed and impacted the entire conflict, its nature. And let's walk you through some of that. Let's put that out. What really were these important milestones as far as the conflict is concerned? The top 5 Russian battlefield milestones. The first and foremost, Mariupol falls after the brutal siege. This happened early on in the conflict. The force with which Russia came and the preparation with which it attacked Ukraine actually left many stunned, including entire NATO and Ukraine as well, which is why Mariupol falling was that key milestone. Next, in May 2025, when Kremlin took stock and control of Donetsk city, is another very important milestone in the war. Remember, Donetsk, Luhansk are regions that are central to Putin's game plan as to why he actually continues this war even now, and getting control of that city was extremely important. Let's now tell you some of the other aspects of the other milestones, which is that in May 2024, when Russian forces opened new front near Kharkiv, this was a very important city for Ukraine, and when this came under the siege of Russian attack, it seemed that the war has taken a completely different turn, and it has actually since then. August 2025 is when this was actually completely encircled. Again, remember, now these are military wins which one cannot just see in the larger picture. Unless you decode them one by one, you cannot understand the scale at which Russian forces have made advances and continue to do so even now. And we're going to come to the Ukraine advances and wins as well. But first, lastly, I want to put out the last part, which is the 10-kilometer breakthrough that was achieved by Russia near the Pokrovsk region. Now, this tells you the big military gains that Russia has made, and some of them are very recent. So remember, Vladimir Putin is actually walking into the Alaska summit with several of these wins under his belt. Let's now quickly walk you through some of the milestones as far as Ukraine are concerned. They've really actually upped the ante in terms of their resistance, the force with which they've actually responded to Russian assault, and some of those have left Russian forces and Putin himself surprised. First and foremost, Kiev withstands the Russian blitz early on. This was right at the beginning, 1 month into the conflict. Kiev was bombarded, the capital city, but it came back. It also acted as a uniting factor when there was massive resistance that came through. Next up, we tell you the other important milestone, Kherson, which was liberated in the southern push. Now, this was extremely significant because this showed what Ukraine could actually do, despite many seemed with having lesser ammunition, did not have the kind of air assault that Russia does, and still was able to respond. Kherson was a key inflection point in the conflict. The other was the drone swarm strikes that hit Russian air bases in June of this year. This was actually Ukrainian indigenous mind in terms of how they thought that they could make the most of the situation. They don't have, as I said, the kind of weaponry, the kind of Russian air assault that Moscow does, but they responded with those drone strikes, which really left massive losses as far as Russian air bases are concerned. The other two, let's quickly tell that, which is the surprise assault that took place inside the Russian stronghold of Kursk region last year. Now, this was extremely significant, viewers, because this even surprised many NATO allies, whether it was President Biden, who was then in office, or several other leaders. They were actually very pleasantly surprised with the ability of Ukraine forces and the agility with which they actually went deep inside the Kursk region. And this was a personal, many would say, a personal blow as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, because he thought that this affected the invincibility of the Russian forces. And lastly, Ukraine retaking the iconic Black Sea outpost early on in June 2022 was another very important aspect of this war. All right, let's now get in Maha Siddiqui, my colleague who's covering this summit from ground, joining us to give us a heads up as to what it's looking like right now. Hours to go for that crucial summit in Alaska.
I'm standing right outside the joint base, Elmendorf-Richardson, that is going to be the venue for the high-stakes meeting between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two leaders will be meeting here on Friday. An area of over 85,000 acres, this base is strategically important for the United States, keeping a watch over the Arctic region as well as the Pacific Ocean, both of which are resource-rich and strategically important for the US. And that is why there are some who believe that the optics perhaps could be all wrong in choosing the venue. They believe that having the president of a rival nation, Russia, on a critically important US base may perhaps not have been the best idea. However, the short notice in which Alaska was declared as the venue for the meeting, many believe that this was the only venue in Alaska and Anchorage that could have provided the sanitized, safe, security-wise space for the two leaders to sit down and discuss a very critical issue that will have global ramifications, that of the possibility of ending the war in Ukraine. In Anchorage, in Alaska, this is Maha Siddiqui for NDTV.
Now, as far as what really happens next in terms of the regions that are at the heart of this conflict, I want to walk you through that, because unless you understand what is really the region, the geography that is at play here, it's difficult to really decode this war. There are the 5 regions. Let's play out that report first, which is the 5 regions at the heart of Europe's deadliest war, which Russia wants, which Ukraine doesn't want to give up. And why are these territories so important, and what's really at stake here if they fail is what this report tells you. And let's play that out first, viewers.
Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson and Kharkiv. 5 names that define the Ukraine war. These strategic gold mines turned battlegrounds are rich in resources, industry and control. Luhansk is almost entirely occupied by Russia, but Ukraine still resists in the southwest because it anchors Russia's presence in the Donbas region and provides a direct route to the Russian border. Holding it secures supply lines and expands Russia's military footprint in the east. Donetsk has been the war's bloodiest front. Russia claims it, but fierce Ukrainian resistance continues in cities like Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka. Donetsk is symbolic. It's the heart of the Donbas, with coal mines, factories and Soviet-era infrastructure that Russia sees as its own. Zaporizhzhia may look like just another farmland at first, but it's home to Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Controlling this region means controlling electricity for millions. Russia holds the south, but not the capital, as Ukraine is still fighting for it. Kherson is the gateway to Crimea. Russia lost the city of Kherson in 2022, but controls much of the surrounding region. It's about geography, river access, land routes to Crimea, and a military buffer between Ukraine's army and Russia's prized peninsula. Kharkiv sits on Ukraine's northeast border, a tech and education hub turned frontline. Ukraine sees holding Kharkiv as key to defending the north and the nation's second largest city. Together, these 5 regions are Russia's key goals and Ukraine's red lines. They hold resources, roots, power and pride. And giving them up could mean giving up the country itself.
This, viewers, is important for you to understand what really is the territory that's at play. But the other aspect to really understand and decode this conflict is why is it that Putin has come out with these sharp red lines? Why does the NATO expansion trigger such fury in Vladimir Putin? Why does he see it as a direct threat on Russian integrity, Russian survival? Now, with NATO missiles already in Poland and Ukraine pushing to join the alliance, Moscow views this as encirclement, not just any coincidence, but something that he feels could actually be at the center of it all from a geographical point of view, from a historical point of view, and from a raw military point of view. And now I'm going to play out this report, viewers, that tells you why this is at the very core of this entire conflict. And unless this is addressed, the Alaska summit may in fact only lead to partial gains, if any.
The distance from Warsaw to Moscow, just 1,200 kilometers. If Ukraine had joined NATO, Western missile systems would sit only 450 kilometers from the Russian capital. For Putin, that's an existential threat. NATO's military footprint in Poland is already significant. Missiles, troops, surveillance, all active and operational on Russia's western edge. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, NATO has expanded eastward. 14 new members, including 7 former Soviet bloc states, were added in 2024 alone. Vladimir Putin claims the West broke its word, that NATO had promised not 1 inch of eastward movement. The West denies any formal agreement, but in the Kremlin, the end of the Warsaw Pact was on the premise that there will be no expansion. And each time a former Soviet state drifted westward, Russia responded with force. Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014, and Ukraine in 2022. The pattern is unmistakable. Now Russia and Belarus are preparing for Zapad 2025. It's a massive joint drill near NATO's eastern flank. 13,000 troops, live fire exercises, and deployment of nuclear-capable Orshnik missiles. These weapons are being stationed in Belarus, a country that already served as a launch pad for the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia is deploying electronic warfare systems just 20 kilometers from Estonia, a NATO member. These systems can jam radars, block GPS, and cripple battlefield communication. Putin's objectives may not be to conquer NATO territory, but to break the alliance from within. A limited incursion, a drone strike, a cyber attack. Designed not to win a war exactly, but to expose lack of unity. NATO leaders now warn Russia could launch a military operation against the alliance within 5 years. Intelligence suggests the Kremlin is preparing for precisely that scenario. In response to the shifting threat, Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, extending its reach and reshaping Europe's security map. But Russia's defense industry is outproducing the West, and its electronic warfare systems are disrupting operations across the Baltic. To Moscow, NATO is not a defensive alliance, it's a network of forward bases, inching closer with each year. And for Vladimir Putin, the red line, well, it's no longer just theoretical.
All right, viewers, on that note, a quick break on fault lines. We come back and talk more about the Alaska summit, where it looks like there is possibility of some sort of a breakthrough in this long conflict. Stay with us. We come back with that and lots more. Countdown to the Alaska summit that the world is watching and is on the edge. As we've been covering this entire conflict, viewers, let's also now talk about what is really some of the areas that are likely to be covered in terms of the stakeholders and their objectives, or what they are looking to achieve from this important visit, from this important summit that is going to take place soon. Very quickly, I'm going to walk you through what is it that Donald Trump is looking at. He wants a ceasefire. He actually wants that Nobel. Don't forget that. He wants to ensure that there is a possibility of a follow-up trilateral meeting, which we've spoken about, where a second summit that Zelensky and Putin could actually be on the table together. And land swaps is what he's actually trying to avoid without actually having Ukraine's approval for it. What is it in it that Russia really wants to achieve from this summit? Use it to advance its strategic position. Remember, it's actually the Russian plan that's on the table that will be discussed between the two leaders. Seek the recognition of the occupied Ukrainian territories, Luhansk, Donetsk, and the Russian-speaking belt. That's crucial and critical for the entire conflict and for Vladimir Putin to really be able to extract that and formalize that in an arrangement. Possibly push for neutral or favorable terms. That's exactly what he's looking at. That peace plan that he has put forth allows for that, and that's something that many people in America feel could be a huge disadvantage. Lastly, what Ukraine wants is, of course, peace, wants that their sovereignty is not undermined. Let's tell you the other aspect that is looking at it, primarily that no territorial concessions. That's the first and most important aspect that Ukraine wants out of this. No concessions whatsoever, and insist on being part of all discussions. That isn't happening in the first phase of the summit, but could potentially happen going forward. But will that actually happen? Will there be a second summit? after the first one is a key aspect. NATO guarantees and several of the other aspects is what the Ukrainian side really wants to. Let's now quickly get in Professor David Dunn, who's a professor of international politics, joining us live on the broadcast. Thanks much, Professor David, for speaking to me on fault lines. Let me first start by asking you in terms of where things stand right now. Are you hopeful of some sort of a ceasefire that can actually come out of the Alaska summit?
In a word, no. I think, as you indicated in your remarks just now there, the sides actually are quite far apart, very far apart, in terms of what their objectives are. The Russians feel confident in both the progress they're making on the battlefield, the momentum they have in general, and their ability to actually prevail in any negotiations with the Americans, to the extent to which they haven't given any indication of reducing their maximalist demands.
Professor David, then I hate to interject you there, sir, but very quickly I want to ask you then, will this then signal yet another turn in the grinding war? Then if it's not ending, then it clearly means some sort of an inflection point.
But that is a potential outcome for that. It's possible that Trump could come away from this and put increasing pressure on Russia, both economically and in terms of secondary sanctions on India and other countries. But it's also possible, as many of the Europeans fear, that Trump will put pressure on Zelensky to make more concessions than he is currently prepared to do. So the stakes are very high in this conflict, and it's really a situation that could go either way, partly because we have two very unpredictable protagonists involved in this summit, and it's possible that we can get a variety of outcomes.
All right, Professor David, thanks much. I believe we're going to speak more on this the moment the Alaska summit starts and we get to know whether there is actually any breakthrough or not. I'm going to leave it there. Viewers, let's now talk about the weaponry, the ammunition, all of which has been very important and central to this war. And the kind of weaponry that's actually been used on both sides includes everything from refurbished F-16s to the drones that Ukrainians have been able to master. My colleague Vishal Vivek puts that all together in this report.
As hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian soldiers are engaged in the most brutal conflict of their lives, it is actually heavy machinery shaping the war. As the war rages on, we zoom in on the most iconic weapons of Moscow and Kyiv that have reshaped the battlefield. Dubbed St. Javelin, this fire-and-forget missile has reduced Russian tanks to burning hulks, its top-down strike even defeating advanced T-90s. The complete system costs about $178,000. Since mid-2022, HIMARS has shattered Russian ammo depots and command posts far behind enemy lines. In March, dozens of Russian troops were killed in a HIMARS strike on Kherson military range. Approximately priced at $5 million per launcher, each rocket costs around $100,000. Now, the most famous US export to Ukraine, the Patriot air defense system, and they have stunned the world, frequently shooting down Russia's unstoppable Kinzhal missiles, protecting Kyiv from catastrophe. Priced at around a whopping $1 billion for a full battery, each interceptor missile costs around $4 to $5 million. Another iconic US weapon Ukraine has been using is the F-16 fighter jet. These aircrafts have been performing effectively in Ukraine's defense operations. Experts have highlighted the aircraft's successes against Russia's cruise missiles and attack drones. F-16s can cost anywhere between $40 million and $70 million, with the price varying based on the specific configuration and upgrades. The Russian president had boasted about Kinzhal missiles during its unveiling. They have been fired at Kyiv in multiple waves, only to be famously intercepted by Ukraine's Patriot system. On the other hand, the Caliber cruise missile has been quite successful for Russia. Used in mass barrages, they have been used to target Ukraine's energy infrastructure, causing many power blackouts. Each missile can cost up to $6.5 million. In the vast Russian arsenal, it is safe to say that the cheap Shahed drones have inflicted the most damage. Often unleashed in swarms, they have overwhelmed Ukraine's air defenses. The legendary T-90 rolled into battle in eastern Ukraine, fitted with advanced reactive armor and infrared jammers. However, it has not been able to replicate its past successes in the battlefield, as several tanks were destroyed by Ukraine's javelins, turning this symbol of Russian might into a cautionary tale of modern anti-tank warfare. Each weapon embodies a strategy, agility, affordability, and pinpoint defense versus overwhelming firepower and armored might, and every strike is measured not just in damage, but in dollars. As missiles rain, drones swarm, and tanks burn, the war is more than a battlefield. It's a ledger, cost, capability, and catastrophe.
Viewers, bottom line is that this is a war which started with NATO's eastward expansion. It will not end till there is clarity on that. Putin's ultimate aim is twofold: get as much buffer territory as possible between Russia and several of the other NATO countries and the weaponry that is installed there, which includes Donetsk, Luhansk and that entire region, and also ensure that there is a sizable reduction of NATO troops near its borders and possibly even on the entire European continent. Now, this is something that Europe will not agree to, not after putting in billions and billions of dollars into the conflict, both by the EU as well as the US. But viewers, also remember that Donald Trump is a man in a hurry. He needs his Nobel. Any movement is progress for him and grounds for yet another recommendation letter for Nobel. But it's not just his pride that's on the line, it's also Vladimir Putin's, whose legacy is also at stake here. And viewers, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Fault Lines. Thanks so much for watching. Next week, we're going to come out with another set of conflicts and wars that we will decode right here for you.